We're on, baby. Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show here in Carmel Valley, California, with an absolutely legendary musician and a great human being.
You mean old?
That too, but it's not bad. Getting younger in his soul every day. Bruce Forman, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, man, great to be here.
You know, we talked about it last time. That cat Dorsey, who he told you, he's like, you want to go play with your Wes records, you know?
Right.
All right? Or do you want to be yourself? I didn't hire you to be Wes.
Right.
And you told me, you said, Jake, we could spend an hour talking about the tongue lashings that you received. Now, I want to be clear. This was emboldening. This was helpful talks to you. And I wanted you to talk about another example for younger cats, because we live in a kinder, gentler time.
Yeah.
And you, as a teacher, also admit you're not as ferocious as... But I just wanted you to talk about another experience of sort of when someone got on you, but it was actually, in retrospect, a really important part of your career.
Well, you know, that happens so much. I mean, you've got to understand it. Like, I was this young kid who wanted to play, and I was really lucky that the cats either heard something in me or liked something in me that they hired me. But there were, of course, numerous times where I didn't know the song or really wasn't capable of hanging. And they were upset because this was a gig. And if I mess up the gig, everybody's rents, everybody's livelihood is in question. And so they would be harsh because they were kind of under pressure. You know what I mean? It's just like, hey man, learn the song. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And it would be like a knife to my heart. And then I'd like at the end of the break, I'd want to talk about it or hide
get
or
it out
anything.
Yeah, totally.
And it was completely gone. I mean, I had to remind those guys that they even said that. You know what I mean? It was like, it's kind of like when you discipline your dog. You tell them they're not cool, but then when you're done and they get it, it's over. It's totally, you still love them and you know everything's still cool, but that was just the way it was done. And it took me a long time to realize that this wasn't a personal affront. And the fact that I was even on the gig meant that I had made it. You know, like here in my mind, I was still trying to be worthy,
totally.
Because that's who we all are. I mean, good musicians, I think, generally are. But in their mind, I was already on the gig. I just needed to get my shit together in one way or another. And they really didn't have time to sit and tell me all the good things I did first before they told me that. They didn't have time to explain what they meant. They were literally in the middle of taking care of business. So it was kind of like a quick spank and then move on, And so it took me a while to realize that, but I did realize it pretty fast. And it still stings to this day when anybody ever says anything like that. So,
well, I want to ask you something. I mean, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but you're on the bandstand. Tell me Dorsey's first name again.
No, it was Richard Dorsey.
Richard Dorsey. So
and I can't find him on the internet. I can't find him anywhere. It's almost as if I invented him as a ghost. But I mean, of course,
because I
played lots of gigs with him, and I remember mostly Manny Boyd was the saxophone player. Usually it was
played
Eddie,
flute too.
Yeah, usually it was Eddie Marshall or Eddie Moore.
Dude, you're talking about shaman music. I mean Eddie Marshall.
Yeah.
And those guys were your I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is, what is the closest thing that you can do with students that you have or younger cats today? Because here's the thing, regardless of whether it's stung or not, the message got through, and it was on the bandstand. It was like practical application. It wasn't sitting in a lesson being told something.
Right.
But are you able to do that today?
It's different. It's different.
How is it different?
It's different in school. First of all, we're not on the bandstand, so I'm not under that kind of pressure where I'll go off on them the way those guys went off on me. I mean, I can stop and explain what's not happening. You know what I mean? And maybe, I generally make a tendency of say what was kind of good before I say what they really need to work on. Maybe I do that because that's sort of the way we need to communicate that to this generation that's happening now. But no, I'm very honest with them. And the other thing is, they heard it too, man. Nothing gives you you want to lose your credibility as a teacher is when a student shits the bed and you tell them it sounds good. You have completely lost all credibility, and they'll probably never listen to another thing you say. So you really have to it's incumbent upon you being honest. Your credibility is
absolutely
in question.
Absolutely.
So yes, we can do that. The difference being they're not on the gig, so like it's not like it doesn't have that same sort of do or die feeling to it. It doesn't have, like I was on the gig, I realized if I didn't make it, there'd be somebody else doing my gig, and I didn't want that. I knew that my way to get to where I needed to go was to play with these great cats and absorb everything that needed to be absorbed. And, and besides the fact that it was so much fun.
You're talking about, well, first of all, do you feel also that the bag of tunes that you eventually got your big bag of tunes came from experience? They were calling tunes you didn't necessarily know.
Right.
So you were basically trying to just keep time, rhythm, but ultimately it wasn't like you were learning out of a real book. I mean, you had a baseline of tunes, but a lot of tunes you learned just on the fly.
Oh yeah, and mostly I did. Here's the way it went. They'd call a tune. If I didn't know it, I'd figure it out on the bandstand. But
wow.
I made a mental note of that tune, and I went home, and believe me, if they called that tune the next night, I knew it because I had done my research. And even then, we didn't have YouTube and all this stuff. So that meant maybe, like, I don't know if you remember Tom Madden over at the Magic Flute. There was a great record store on the Magic Flute. It was on Stanyon, right next to where my high school was.
Magic,
Stanyon and Frederick.
near Kezar.
Yeah, right near Kezar. And I'd call my friends to see if anybody had a record of that song, and or if somebody had a lead sheet, somebody had a fake book, or a friend could teach it to me. So I had like my work for the next day was pretty obvious, this tune and this tune and this tune, and I always, we had these incredible tune cats around. We had Smith Dobson and we had Al Plank.
What about Kent Glenn?
And Kent Glenn, of course. He wasn't in town as much.
He was much older too.
It wasn't the age.
That's the coolest part is that it was
he had moved to L.A.
right
too, and but yes, all these guys I would call them, and it would be my job to figure out the tunes that I didn't know from the night before and learn them, and I wasn't I would call also, I knew the guys at K-Jazz, the disc jockeys at K-Jazz, so I could call them and ask them to play a version of that.
That is classic. You want to talk about beautiful regional radio.
Yeah.
You call a DJ and say, hey, now it was a jazz station, but you could say, can you
do me a favor and play what you think is the definitive version of this tune,
And it's just, I don't know, it just made a lot of sense. But I mean, we're talking to a cat, Bruce Forman, who very humble, but would you say that when Ed Kelly came and gave I don't want to say demo, but he was exhibiting the organ at your student-driven learning, the school you went to?
Yeah.
Was that, how quickly after that did you start gigging with him?
Oh, not. It was a while. A while.
And how did you, I'm just curious about
How
that
did it
nexus.
happen?
Did you walk into a place or
No, well, I know. I used to go over and sit in at Mr. Major's where he had the session, and I got called to play that session too. Sometimes he would hire a guitar, whether he felt like doing it on organ or whether he just wanted a guitar in the band with the piano. So I mean, yeah, I would work. That's when I started working with him fairly soon after that. He wasn't the organ trio we put together was years after that. But
Yeah, that Muse recording is
yeah.
82. I'm just, because when he came to your high school, I mean, you're
Yeah,
still in high school.
that was 73, probably 72.
And then when did you start at sitting in at Mr.
Yeah,
Major's?
probably 73, 4, 5. Yeah.
Unbelievable. And that was the sort of trail of breadcrumbs. That was they didn't articulate it, but you knew that it was your job to go and learn the tune for the next night.
Yeah.
And that was the key. If you didn't, then you probably would be off the gig.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, yes, I'm making it sound like I did this for just mere preservation of professional whatever. But I'm just curious. I mean, the tunes are great. I wanted to learn them. That's really, I mean, that made it easy. Is that I really wanted to do that. It's not like, oh, I better do this or I'll lose the gig. No, it's just like I don't know that tune. I mean, even though I was 18 or 17 years old, I was embarrassed, and it was a song from another generation. I was embarrassed that I didn't know it too, and I wanted, so there was numerous pressures on personal self-pressure on me to learn it. One, of course, to keep the gig. One, of course, just not to be embarrassed that I didn't know it. And of course, the most important one is it was a really great piece of music that I wanted to know.
You were motivated to do it. Yeah, I love it. I mean, there's just something else that I want to get on the record. You talked about, I think, Charles Moffat. And you would play avant-garde, but you said to me it didn't really feel like it made sense to you. It didn't feel like free or too abstract. Can you talk, it was in your bag.
Yeah.
As opposed to, can you talk about, because there's this fine line between noise and sound. And also just the idea that when I think of Ornette, like Moffat played with Ornette,
Yeah.
and some people consider that way out, but it still it made more sense to you than maybe even electric fusion music did.
To me, it did.
And why? Why is that?
I don't know. I mean, it's just because I would listen to Ornette just like I would listen to Bird. I would listen to Eric Dolphy like I would listen to, Sonny Stitt. I mean, it was like, to me, it was all kind of the same thing, I mean, different, of course. It sounded different and the concept was different, but everybody was just listening to each other and playing, and there was structure to Ornette's music. I mean, if you really listen to it, it's not free form. It's just not just arbitrary shit. They're listening to each other and feeding off of each other, and there are connections in the music. And to me, and I was in Sonny Simmons' band, which was what kind of led me to the Moffat family. And half the time we were just playing the blues or Moment's Notice or crazy. I mean, Sonny would ask me, "What do you want to play?" And I'd call a tune, and he'd play the shit out of it. I mean, definitely a different way than most anybody else would play it. But that's kind of, again, big. That's why I love this music, is everything is so personal to the person doing it, coming out of their experience and their aesthetic and just their personality. And so it's just, I don't know.
We're all those cats, for the most part, street scholars, ear trained musicians.
I never even got beyond to find out whether they were school trained or ear trained.
Not that it would matter. I just, you know what it is?
I would assume so. I would bet if they were school trained, I bet they drove their professors crazy.
Yeah, I mean, because what you're talking about with Sonny Simmons, where, he played it a different way, but it wasn't wrong.
No.
It was right, but it wouldn't be the way you would be taught in school.
Right.
And it's like, the idea is there's a homogenization. When we talk about jazz, melodic improvisation, I have a hard time hearing who people are today. The individuality seems to be going away, and some of that has to do with the fact that there's a lot of factors, but some of it's that, I mean, you got a PhD on the bandstand. There are some cats that are in tenured faculty positions that have never played live before.
Yes,
and that's
true.
a crisis. I mean, that to me is jazz is about individual self-expression, telling your story.
I agree. I totally agree with you, Jake. But before we throw the baby out with the bathwater,
I don't want to be negative. I'm just saying, let me look towards the light. Tell me what is
okay. So here is where I mean, and I'm a person who's in school, and yes, I recognize there's
Where are you at, by the way?
I'm at University of Southern California,
Beautiful. Okay.
and
So when
I would
Dugu was
say
there,
I would we would gotta agree that I mean it's been something, an art form that is so free and so individual has been institutionalized somewhat in order to live inside that structure. That being said, for kids to get together and play and learn from people that have done it already and all those things, there's no other place for them to do that. So if the school hadn't taken up that mantle, we might have lost everything altogether. I mean, the kids are hanging, and kids are still unique and rebellious, just like we were, and I love it. Now, I think there are some teachers who have trouble with that, you know what I mean, with that paradigm of, because like now they're professors and they're teaching this music and they want everybody to do all this work. And when you do all this work, you will be a jazz musician. But I'm not one of those.
No.
I encourage and I applaud and I challenge all of the individual and all of the rebelliousness and all of that, because that is where this music is from. And also just what people think of jazz. You know, we're listening to jazz now through our modern lens, and it wasn't like that when I was listening to it as a kid, and it definitely wasn't like that when it was happening the generations before. I mean, there was times you had John Coltrane. I'll guarantee he wasn't making a lot of money out there on the road. He was, his name wasn't up in lights, and
it's the lore now.
There are
a
lot of human beings that didn't have a whole lot of agency culturally, who were free on the bandstand. That was the one place where they could be themselves, and of course they were musically brilliant. It's documented, it, but it was also a place where they could be 100% themselves with complete control of their world, where most of us don't have that off the bandstand.
That's right.
And so, I mean, that's what the music really represents. It doesn't represent who plays better. It doesn't represent who makes more money or who's got the bigger name, you know what I mean, or who knows the most tunes. It's, what that represents is the ability to actually have agency and be creative and be, in control at the same time as being out of control.
Can you give an example of a rebellious situation that you allowed to you fostered at Southern California?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. You
don't have to name names. I'm just saying,
I mean, there was one kid came in and and he was totally doing just crazy shit. You know what I mean? And like
it must have brought a smile to your face.
It did, and but I challenged him because I could hear bullshit in it at the same time. I could hear a
little genius. Yeah.
Yes, and this guy. He actually studied with me in high school before he studied with me at USC, and now he's actually more famous than me.
Whatever that means. Fame is not.
He's playing bigger gigs than me.
Okay.
But
at the time,
he's brilliant.
Yeah,
yes. And at the time, I was calling him. I'm like, this isn't really happening, but this really, and it's like, and I'm like saying, don't stop doing this, man. But when you do this, you got to, come on, man. You're lazy here. You're being lazy here, but you've really got an idea. You follow through, And of course he'd blow me off at times, and at times he probably realized that what I was saying was true. I remember back when somebody said that to me. I had a teacher when I was really young. He wasn't particularly a great guitar player, but had an incredible musical mind.
Yeah.
And he was calling me on some shit, and I remember being a little bit resistant to him, mostly because he couldn't play it.
Yeah, I did.
Right?
I did.
And then, it didn't take me a good month or two before I realized what he was saying was true. It was just, I was in a moment where I was defensive.
Sure, pride was involved. Yeah, I dig.
And I couldn't hear it, but he was right. You know what I mean? And I never called him up to tell him he was right, because he'd probably forgotten about it and didn't give a shit anyways. But, that's just the natural progression of what we do. And, gravity takes care of everything. We all end up where we end up, You know, I mean, some of us end up as great players, some of us end up as good players, some of us end up as whatever, you know what I mean? And and there's no rhyme or reason to who can make a living at this and who can't, or who makes a lot of money. It just is what it is. And the real point of it is a human being's journey on the quest of the sounds that they're hearing in their head, you know, to get to that sound, to make, you know, to live a full life, to have your personality, you know, to grow, you know, all those things. That's what it's really about. All this other stuff is just stuff.
Do you? I did. I mean, when you, I remember talking to Kenny Burrell, who's at UCLA, and he would be talking about, well, the jam sessions aren't in Donald Byrd's basement. They're in the school cafeteria, or you know, and I hate that word simulation, but I just want to ask you straight up, like, can you codify a street language like blues and jazz? Like, how does that work where it goes into a curriculum? To me, the genius of Larry Bradford and Ed, I mean, maybe not Ed Kelly, but I mean,
God,
there's so many cats that are like, even guys in Tucson. I mean, there's still, I mean, guys that are, that a teacher would say that's not the correct way, but it's not, but it still feels good and it's still right.
Right, sure.
And I feel like that is not, within this community, it's more frowned upon if you're trying to be yourself. I only want people to be themselves. And I wonder how you try to create the live experience as opposed to just talking to the cats. Because like outside of Catalina's, I don't know how many jazz clubs there are in LA now. I mean, it's just not that many.
Well, there are places where people are playing and kids are playing, hopefully, and it's
Blue Whale or something.
Again, that's their fight. You know, I mean, just like I had my fight. I mean, I came up playing a music and playing with cats that were not of my generation. And
We're the luckiest cats around, man.
But they were around, and I found them, and I became a part of it. And that's still happening with those younger cats, too. They're out finding me, and I've got guys on the road in my bands that, you know, are like 20, 30, 40 years younger than me, and they're playing their asses off, and they're searching it out, and they're doing it. So it's there, and it's still there for people who want it. But there's also a new kind of thing that's coming up with that they're doing, you know what I mean? And with the use of the way they play, but also social media and new environs and stuff, they're figuring out a way to do it, you know, and maybe it doesn't comport to what we know and what we like, but it's a new thing that's valid, and they've got to be given, you know, their due to create their world. Because if we're going to sit here and talk about how you got to be yourself, you know, then we got to give them their chance to be themselves.
Totally.
And if we just don't see, if it just doesn't jive with what we think of as the ideal, that's our fault. That's not theirs.
I just, when do you feel like you started your professional career? 15, 16?
Probably, well, yeah, my first gig, I think my first good paying gig was 16.
And it was like, and that was straight in during high school. I mean,
yeah, I was in high school.
You know,
it was a New Year's gig. You know, some guy needed an organ player, needed a guitar player. I got the gig, and I scuffled my way through it. You know.
What was your biggest, in your mind? You talk about it's their fight today. That's what they have to fight. What was your fight? Because to me, it was just more about saying, I'm going to have the balls to go, and I feel like I belong. Maybe I'll fall on my face, but I'm going to play with these cats. Like, not every guitar player in the Bay Area, and there were many, were showing up to play with Ed Kelly or Eddie Marshall or, you know, Eddie Moore. I mean, you know, so in your mind, what was your fight? What was the fight you had to do?
Well, it was mostly just, staying, you know, I heard Tom Waits on the radio just the other day. And he said to Terry Gross, he said, you know, I think I always wanted to be old because I just wanted to hang out with the old cats. You know what I mean? He says, you know, that was always my thing. I was just an old guy in a young body. And I mean, I don't really feel exactly that, but I feel that the thread of what he's talking about, the concept, is what I was. I mean, there I was in San Francisco. You know what was happening around that time. I mean, rock and roll was going crazy. I even did jam sessions at the Airplane House over there, you know, on Fulton and
on set in the Haight.
Yeah, over by on Stanton in was it Stanton and Fulton, I think. Yeah.
Wow. So
The
you,
big
Marty
black house.
Ballin?
Yeah. And I did jams over there, and whatnot.
You put your toe in the water, yeah.
But I was hearing this jazz music being played, and it just blew my mind, and I wanted to be a part of it. And so I just inserted myself into the community because these older cats seemed to play so good, and I just, of course I was in love with Charlie Parker, and so I just wanted to be part of that scene. It just like I never saw such, besides the great music, such a cool scene and such incredibly eccentric human beings whose every eccentricity seemed to be part of their music.
That's what you were talking about, dude. That's it's everything. Their whole life was in the music, in the expression.
Right. And so for me, that's just what I wanted to do. And whatever I figured out how to do it, I did with Bradford, we had a Holiday Inn steady gig for 6 months or a year, maybe.
Dude, I'd be living at the Holiday Inn, dude.
Yeah,
I'd be on the floor, dude.
And we were doing everything because Larry could do everything. Now, I just wanted to play straight ahead, but we were
Was he kicking pedals too?
Yeah, he was doing, so it was we were doing Earth, Wind, and Fire tunes and whatever pop tunes on the radio we had to do just to keep the gig. And, a lot of Stevie Wonder. I don't know, it was just... I just wanted to learn and play with the good guys, because it just seemed obvious to me, and I didn't need to read it. Although I've read this in pretty much everybody's biography, and every lesson I've ever taken. The first thing a guy says is, "What you need to do is play a lot and play with guys that are better than you."
Sure.
That's that. And no one needed to tell me that. I already knew that.
Yeah, to me, you were seeking. That was the key. I don't, how, when you talk about, Eddie Marshall was in the first fusion band in the Fourth Way.
Right.
That was before Weather Report.
Yeah.
And that to me, now I know you weren't necessarily, I don't know how to say this. Maybe rock didn't feel as good. It wasn't, jazz, the rhythms are so interesting and delicious. But what about plugging in? Is that part of, you're obviously plugged in right now, but as the music got louder, that became less appealing to you as well?
No. I still dug it, and I put my toe in.
You're into all music. I'm not saying, but yeah.
I know. I played with salsa bands. You know how loud they were, and I just wanted to play everything. And I played in Brazilian bands. I played with some fusion kind of bands. When the kind of that contemporary pre-smooth jazz was happening. I even tried a little bit of that, although that I quickly just didn't like it. I don't know. But of course, George Benson's one of my favorite all-time musicians who does that music so well. It's sick.
Yeah, but when you go back and watch him pre-smooth jazz,
I did for years.
Unbelievable. And then the same thing. John Clemmer was same thing.
Around the time of Weekend in LA, which was after Breezin' and everything. He was playing so good then. He still is playing. He's still playing amazing. It's just, I love it all. I just really dug straight ahead, and
how about can you play a little tune for us right now?
Sure, yeah. I can play a
straight ahead Forman.
Let me let the dog.
Yeah, all right.
Wants to go
Get a nice shot of Bird here.
She's had enough.
Later.
Good girl, Ruby. Yeah. Play something here.
so much. It's just so beautiful.
I heard Art Tatum play that the other day, and it was, well, that's a good song.
I'm just gonna give you free association. I'm gonna throw out some players, and I just want you to talk a little bit about what comes to mind. Tommy Tedesco.
Wow, what a great cat. I mean, I never really.
He hated rock. He could play rock music. He hated it. Those beboppers hated that stuff.
Yeah, but I mean,
but he could play it.
Such a character. Another one who's just like, I mean, I don't know if you ever read any of those logs he would, those things he would put in Guitar Player magazine about being
vignettes.
And it was always about how like somebody had written out some amazing thing and he'd go in and he'd just figure out something really easy to do.
Yeah.
And talk them into it or something.
Or just play it and they're like, oh, that works.
And he was just such a Godfather type character, and he was that in the studios. I mean, not just guitar players, lots of cats owe him their careers, to.
Well, no, there was a cat, Jimmy Bruno, talked to me about when he was young, going over and there's Pass, Frank Zappa, and Tedesco eating spaghetti and meatballs. It was a great story, but it was just like, this is the greatest group of cats. But I mean, Tedesco, if he liked you and he gave you an opportunity, he would get you into the studio scene.
Right. And I know Jimmy had a couple of run-ins with that.
Some great stories. I'm not even doing justice to it. At some point, he's like, he told Tedesco's like, I got to go pick my car.
Yeah.
He asked Joe Pass to watch the Sausage and Peppers. He burnt it all.
Yeah.
Zappa was there. It was just insane. But all right, here's the next one. Barney Kessel.
Oh, well, Barney, I mean.
When was the first time you crossed paths with him?
Barney probably would have been mid-70s, early 70s. He came to town doing he did a trio hit, but he also, during the day, did a workshop. That was really common, like at the Music Hall, Great American Music Hall.
Sure.
The cats would do a workshop in the afternoon, raise some extra dough, and I went up and played with him. We became friends. He became like my mentor. He took me on the road a lot. He hired me for gigs. I knew him very well. I've ended up with his guitar. I have his guitar now.
I don't think I knew that you guys were that close.
Actually, I just did a record tribute to the Poll Winners where we got Ray Brown's bass and Shelly Mann's drums.
No way.
John Clayton is playing, who was Ray Brown's man, and Jeff Hamilton, who was Shelly's guy, and we had all three of us had played with all three of them. So I mean, Barney is hugely inside of me and on a lot of levels. Barney used to say to me, he said, like once we were on the road over in Europe, and he said to me, do you wonder why I pick you? I was kind of like, yeah, I do. I mean, I knew there was a lot of other guitar players he could have picked besides me. I mean, it was, Howard Alden and Martin Taylor, a lot of really great players. And he says, I picked you because you play the way I play, but you don't sound like me, is what he said to me. Which is, of course, very cryptic, but very much about what we're talking about.
That's exactly that he nailed it.
Yeah.
Like he digs your style, but it's not his style.
Right. But we still, we both love to swing really hard. We both go for shit. The one thing about Barney is, if an idea comes across, he's going for it. He's not going to worry about if he can make it or not.
In the moment, he's going to go for it. I freaking love it.
Very much, I mean, as you obviously.
Dude, I'm loving it, dude. But you have control. I mean, dude, you're not hitting clams. I mean, you're going for it, but you're doing it.
Yeah, well,
And it's okay to hit a clam.
I do what I do. I mean, I'm just going for it. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know if I'm ever going to have that idea again. I got to find out where it goes.
Wow, that's fascinating stuff. I mean, Joe Pass.
Joe was another guy who I had a lot of.
Can you tell a good Joe Pass story? I mean, the man is such a legendary cat.
Well, there's a bunch of them. First of all, I got to know him in the same way I knew Barney. He came to town. He would do although he usually played solo at night, but he would do a workshop during the day, and or sometimes he'd have a rhythm section for part of the gig, and I got to meet him there and play with him. And then he would come a lot to the Venetian Room, and play either solo or would do it with Ella or with Oscar Peterson's trio, with the Norman Granz thing. And I would spend days with him. I would during all day long. I would just go play with him, But he was like
Hold on, this was in the 70s?
This would have been later.
So
This
so
would
he
have
already
been
knew who you were.
Oh yeah, we knew each
yeah.
other. I kind of jumped forward.
Yeah.
I also went to his house and took some lessons.
Oh
with
dear
him.
God. What was that lesson with Pass?
You know, basically you just play for him and he kind of critiques it and then you play together. and I remember I went and played and I played for him. He says, I told him I'm not really a solo guy. I'm just kind of, I'm a band player, and I was really into playing lines. I comped when needed.
Absolutely.
And so he said, he looked at me, he says, I was just like you. He says, I just wanted to play fast lines and play, and I comped when I had to. And my father made me play chords and stuff, but, I didn't, do that. And he says, and I think he kind of even lied to me, but he says, I was just out with these guys, these Norman Granz guys, he's putting the thing. And one day he says, Joe, go out and play 20 minutes, before the show,
Right.
open the show. And I did, and everybody loved it. And next thing you know, he's sending me out solo, and then I'm playing duo with Ella, and then I'm like, and then he says I went in and we were making records every week, and I go in to make this record, and I asked the guy, well, who else is on it? And the guy looks at the call sheet and says, nobody, it's just you solo. So he didn't even know. Now, I have heard that that's not really true, but
it's
not
possible. I mean, it was on Pablo. Who knows?
I think Joe just maybe was playing with me. I've heard from enough people who I trust that was not really the case. But regardless,
even.
Anyways, he was a joker of that kind of way. Anyways, but that record, that Virtuoso record, that first record changed my life, changed every guitar player's life, because until then, guitar players who played solo were pretty much arrangement guys. Okay, it was like and not that they weren't great. I mean, Johnny Smith and all those guys were just like unbelievable. Lenny Breau was doing
dude.
stuff.
Get out of here.
Chet Atkins, unbelievable stuff. But Joe kind of move the guitar into the Art Tatum world, where you can just pick a tune, play it, make shit up, and just somehow make something out of it.
Wow.
And that became what solo jazz guitar was. And it really wasn't that before that, in my mind, to me at least. And it just sort of changed the whole world of what was possible. And anyways, in that very same lesson, Joe was telling stories. He goes, I was a band player pretty much just like you, playing fast stuff, Then I had this gig, and now I'm kind of a solo player. That's what everybody knows me as. And he says, and he looked me in the eye and he says, it's going to happen to you. And I told him, I remember I said, Joe, you're full of shit. No way that's going to happen to me. I'm too much of a band guy. Well, if you've been following my career, you know how much I've been playing solo. I even got my one-man show, The Red Guitar. I'm very much going in that
He's
direction.
looking down and saying,
every time I get up and do that show, I just think of that one day when he looked in my eyes and says, it's going to happen to you. And I was just like, no fucking way. And here I am. So Joe was great, but Joe would at the Venetian Room. I don't know if you ever went there in San Francisco, in the Fairmont Hotel.
Yeah,
it was.
I know the name, but
and it's funny that they call it the Venetian Room, but it was it had wrought iron and stuff, in there, as well as the Venetian paintings, some New Orleans kind of shit. And he would always leave his guitar in the corner. He would just put it in the corner. So usually when I went up to play with him, I would be the only one with the guitar, because his guitar would be down in the room, and we'd both play on my guitar, and and he'd just basically make me entertain him and then critique me. And so one day I'm watching Oscar Peterson's trio, right? And they had this opening act, the maitre d' had been giving Joe shit about leaving his guitar. He was so worried that the maintenance crew was going to steal it or knock it over and break it.
Totally,
right. They didn't want to be responsible for it. You got to bring that guitar. You can't leave it here. You can't leave it here. Okay, so he finally takes it up to the room one night. And the way they started the band was and now on drums, Martin Drew. Martin Drew would come out, and now on bass, Nils Henning, Norstedt Pedersen. And he'd come out and he'd start playing Time, and they're playing the blues. And now on guitar, Joe Pass. And Joe would walk out, and he walked over to the corner where he would always get his guitar. Only this night he'd forgotten that he'd left it in his room. So he walks over and he looks at the corner and there's no guitar there, and it dawns on him where the guitar is.
Oh man.
And he looks at the audience and he kind of like shrugs his shoulders and pulls his hands out, kind of like the shake and bake guy on the commercial. And he walked right off the stage, to go up to his room to get his guitar. Of course,
He was like he's like maybe just some drums and bass for a while.
And then Oscar comes, and then Oscar Peterson.
Oh,
Oscar was so pissed off. You
Wow.
could just see smoke coming out of him. And then Joe goes up to his room and comes back down and plugs in and plays. And because I had a friend who ran the sound, so I was pretty much there every night, hearing that. Every night I wasn't working. And that was Joe. Joe was just loose, relaxed, get up and play. He was very apathetic about a lot of things, but I mean, when it came to playing, there's like nobody. I mean, he broke down barriers, and like I say, that
Virtuoso one.
That whole Art Tatum-ish approach. Of course, we can't do what an Art could do physically, but we can conceptually do that. And that's kind of, what you heard me do for these last two tunes. And that comes from Joe, and it comes from listening to those guys play solo,
I just been talking to my buddy Jim Keltner quite a bit, and he, everyone knows him as a great studio drummer, but
Right.
the guy was like playing on Claire Fisher records in the late 60s. He was a jazz fanatic. Him and Stinson just wanted to be Philly Joe and Jimmy, they just wanted to cook.
Yeah.
And one of his idols was Shelly Manne, and he recalls this story when he was 16, calling up Shelly and Flip, his wife, answered the phone, and she's like, he's taking a nap, but let me go wake him up. I mean, again, he's much older than Keltner.
Yeah.
And Keltner's there sitting there talking to him about cymbals and what kind of cymbals. And it was just like Shelly, on this journey that I've been on, he is deep in my soul. And the more that I listen to him, not so much like the Blackhawk stuff with Kamuka and stuff, but more as my sort of bag, fusion. When I hear him play, he's the funkiest drummer I've ever. I mean, he's really funky. And you said you played with him.
Oh yeah, I've played with Shelly a lot.
Can you talk about playing with him? Because to me, that dude was one of the most soulful. I mean, he had the greatest club. He was just the greatest player, and everybody says he's just a great guy.
Yeah, well, there were so many sides to Shelly.
Really?
Unfortunately, I didn't know him during the Manhole days. I was too young.
Sure.
But my first interactions with him were through the Monterey Jazz Festival. He was in the All-Star Quartet.
Who was in that group?
The original, it was Hank Jones, Andy Simpkins, Shelley, and Mundell Lowe.
That is the Mundell. Thank you for bringing up. Let's touch on him too before we.
Mundell was the music director of the Jazz Festival at that time, and there was a guitar explosion, they called it, and it was me and Mundell and Eddie Duran and John Collins and Ron Eshte, and we all played, and the rhythm section backed us up. Shelley and
Simpkins.
Hank and Andy. And after that gig, Mundell took me aside and he said, "Bruce, I'm working too hard here. I want you to take over my spot in the All-Star Band." Okay. And I said, okay. and so now we're backing up Dizzy and Clark Terry and Sweets Edison and Red Holloway and,
Cleanhead.
Yeah, all these guys, Stan Getz, all these guys that were coming through. I mean, because I did that for a couple of years, of course. Then Shelley kind of moved on, had his own band and didn't want to do the All-Star thing anymore, and Vince Ladiano took over.
Oh, yeah.
But Shelley was just amazing, man, And I don't know how many years Shelley was in that. And then, of course, when I would have gigs in L.A., I would play Dante's a lot. I'm trying to think, Catalina's a couple times, when it was in the other place.
Sure.
And Shelley would do those gigs. I don't know, Shelley died before Catalina's opened, I think. No, it was mostly Dante's.
It was like a trio trio thing with you, bass, and Shelley?
Yeah, it was me, and it's usually Andy Simpkins or Bob Mays had moved down there, or who else do we use?
Maybe John Hurd.
Yeah, that's right, John Hurd.
Dude. Yeah. Rest in peace.
Yeah, and so I would go down there and use those cats, and and Shelley, on top of being great jazz player, probably the world's best fast tempo jazz drummer, I think.
he just pushed the tempo.
He just was so relaxed, and it was so steady.
Yeah, it didn't feel rushed
and he wasn't real busy about it, so it was real clear what he was playing.
Right.
It was real friendly, it never felt hard to play, no matter what tempo it was. But another thing about Shelley is that, and why he was so great in the studio is his approach to sound.
Let's talk about that.
It wasn't just drumming. It was like the sound of each cymbal and the sound of each drum. And like, if you listen to his recordings, how much variety he gets, and like the way he brings in, whether it's using his hands or using castanets or, hitting the rims or, hitting two sticks together. I mean, he's always coming up with these really creative sonic signatures. Why Henry Mancini used him all the time? Why all those guys used him
on those soundtracks? The legend.
And there's an incredible record which I encourage everybody to listen to. It's called Sounds
with Jack Marshall.
Jack Marshall, right? And
kind of an enigma. I don't really know much about that.
He's a great guitar player.
Is he still with us?
He's a studio cat. No, I don't believe.
Yeah, no, he was like a Mundell Lowe era guy.
Yeah, right. And they did 2 records, but there were
They're
sounds
insane.
and more sounds.
Yeah.
And it's when you really want to get an idea of Shelley and all the things that he can do, and the way he hears, and that Jim Keltner really got a lot of that. I mean, he of anybody who's like the next generation of understanding the sound of the drums and all the things you can do with it in the studio. Keltner is like, when I did this particular record, the tribute to the Pullman, I got Jeff Hamilton, but there's part of me that wants to do another record with Barney's guitar and just have Keltner.
Well, I'll give you his number. I don't know if you he's a dear friend. I mean, all I'm saying is that the dude, and he brought those colors and all that sound into rock music and country music, and so some cats would say he's they say he's the Elvin Jones of rock.
Well, I know he's really into Elvin. I've heard a lot.
But Shelley was his mentor.
Right.
I mean, the fact that he was 16, right around the time that you started to play with. I mean, this is earlier, but when you were playing with Ed Kelly, fast forward, rewind 8 years. And he's calling Shelley on the phone, and his wife is waking him up from a nap.
Right.
And he's talking, and Keltner's there, like, just a kid in the candy store asking about his cymbals. But ultimately, the thing to me, as we wrap up here, I don't know, man. I mean, I'm 43. I know all this stuff because you guys have fed me all this information for 11 years, 2,000 interviews. So I have this knowledge base. But the one word about jazz, and one reason I gravitated to Bruce Forman, and similar to the Shelley Mann story, jazz to me is about inclusivity. It's about a conversation, but it's also about humanity. And I just feel like the jazz that I love the most doesn't really even matter what year it is. It's just, you can feel that it's all heart and soul. And I just wonder what your advice would be to cats in terms of everyone is, because there's so few gigs and everybody wants to show their technique and facility and chops, and that's all well and good. But how do you try to get cats to get the music to feel good and inclusive and danceable? Because, when I go see jazz today, you talked before about those cats getting on you if you didn't know a standard.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think there were nights where you might have been playing to 3 people. It wasn't like you were playing, San Francisco Jazz Center where there's like this, to me, what's happened, which is just from my own point of view, there's been a classicalization of the jazz presentation where you go and you sit and you stare at somebody's facility. You applaud after a song, even if you don't even like the tune.
Right.
Whereas opposed to just like, we're going to have a ball. Like, to me, like, that's why I'm so excited about that time period that you came up in, because, there was some tough love, but people were having a ball.
Right.
And I just, how do you, some of this stuff is almost too intrinsic or nuanced, but how do you work with cats today to get the music to feel good and not be so hung up about riffology?
Well, I guess, there's not much I mean, especially me, being one would consider, not a major player on the world stage.
Well,
But that being
come on.
said, my ability to influence. Of course, I've got my students and the people I mentor, and I've got the people in my circle. Mostly, it's I choose to lead by example.
How? I guess if you
Does
see,
that make sense?
Yeah, I do.
I mean,
But
I've had problems throughout this century.
yeah,
And now the 20 years into
that's right.
it, of taking the fun out of jazz.
Exactly.
Okay, and if you look at it, you'll see my band Cowbop, which is very funny and fun, and and I did the one thing that you could never do is add cowboys to jazz, right? That was the third rail. I mean, you could put hip hop with jazz, you could put Brazilian with jazz, you could put East European odd meters. That was well accepted in jazz. No one had a problem. Funk, rock, and jazz. Everybody said
Keep the cowboy out of it.
But boy, cowboys keep out. Well, I said, wait a minute, what's wrong with that? Have they ever even heard Bob Wills? How much jazz was being played there? And so. But besides that, it was fun and funny, and I wanted to do it. I do comedy. I have fun, and I'm just not gonna. And now, of course, and that was like the early period of Winton, right?
Yeah.
But now, I mean, I hang out with Winton. Winton is a funny guy. Sometimes, he's more Louis Armstrong than Louis Armstrong was.
I know, but it's just I'm go ahead, continue.
And so it's like my feeling is like I don't want to get on a soapbox because I hate people that pontificate. So my feeling is what I'm going to do is live my truth and hope that somehow that inspires the people around me and maybe in my wildest dreams a movement.
Well, what I'm saying, I just want to be clear with what you're saying. Essentially, if you have cats that are maybe taking things lead by example, you said, so they're real serious and they're focused only on like getting perfection, and you may be like, come check out my gig on Friday,
right.
And come see how, and let them just by osmosis, because you said in our interview on the air, on the radio, that a lot of stuff you picked up just through osmosis.
And that's what we all do. I mean, that, the idea that we teach is a fallacy. People learn. We don't teach.
That's that's deep.
You know what it is? I mean, I'm there and I can show you stuff, but you have to learn it. I'm not teaching it to you. You have to do that work.
That's right.
And it has to go through your filter of your experience and your physical being and your ability to come out as sound. So it's you that's doing it. It's not me. So I just do by example. I lead by example. And of course, if anybody asks my opinion of something, I'm very free with it. And I try not to be judgmental because I know it's just my opinion and it's no more valid than anybody else's opinion, And so, but I really feel that the responsibility is to just be the thing that you want to have happen and let that represent it, because let's face it, I mean, we're friends on Facebook. You see what's out there. There's a bunch of guys pontificating, trying to claim they know what jazz is. They're angry that somebody else isn't doing jazz. They'll argue about shit like they're speaking for Max Roach, or like they're speaking for Elvin Jones, or like they're speaking for
Mingus
Art
or something.
Tatum,
Yeah.
And it's like those guys would probably say, "What the hell are you talking about?" I mean,
No, I want to be also very clear.
My point is can we all let's just lead by example, and again, try and create a world where the music is what matters, not the playing, and also create a world where we want as many people who might be interested in being part of this community, we want them inside the tent.
Absolutely.
So how do we do that? Well, we don't act like a bunch of assholes.
Like know-it-all pontificators. If somebody asks your opinion, fine, but you're not going to...
And guys putting other guys down and creating little wars about things, and it's like, really? What's the point of that? Or saying the young kids, they ain't got shit today because they didn't do this, but these kids play more shit today than we did. Mm-hmm. It's just in a different way.
Right.
And if we want the world to go in a good direction, lead in that direction. Don't pontificate.
And don't gripe or be. And I also, just for the record, I mean, it's so classic to hear you we are friends on Facebook. One of the keys, and you are a prolific producer of content.
Yeah.
I never receive content on Facebook. I'm not a musician also,
Yeah.
so it's very
Yeah.
easy for me.
Yeah.
But I would just advise people, if you're going to go on new media, drive content, and hopefully it's compelling content, but do not receive, because it's all just people wanking it essentially. I mean, but just produce.
Yeah.
Be yourself
And have a thing you want to do. I mean, me,
have a niche. Yeah.
I have a very, very specific reason to be on there, and I don't let myself go. I mean, yeah, of course I see things that piss me off, and I don't let myself comment on it, because who gives a shit what I have to say about that? And I really, it's like the old thing. If you burned me for a gig, right, and I got mad at you, and I said, "Hey, Jake, man, he burned me for X amount of money, man. Don't work for him. Jake's an asshole, whatever." All people would remember is that Bruce got burned. They wouldn't remember who burned me or for how much. They'd remember I got burned.
Such a good point.
And do I want the world to really think of me as he got burned? I don't want that.
That is so perfect, man. It's true.
That's the way people remember shit. It's just that we're especially on that medium, because that it's all clickbait and candy.
Yeah.
So I mean, my point is, if we all thought of ourselves more as a community, and that's always what I've been about, even though we call it jazz or we call it whatever you want, it's like building community.
Absolutely.
And it's not just the other musicians; they're a big part of it. It's also the people who like the music. It's also the people who might like the music. The people who might not like the music, but their friends might like it. And I mean, to me, I think doing this, and I think the sound of this, and I think the world around it is great, and I want to encourage everybody to be a part of it. And I do that by just being that. And because I know if I say that, people will get the idea that I'm telling them what to do. And I'm not telling them what to do. I want them to be a part of this.
I would say that everything, I mean, I just try to be an ambassador for the music and an advocate for the musicians. And I would say the best thing to do, and I think you encapsulate this, don't take yourself that seriously, but take what you do very seriously.
Exactly.
But I mean, have fun and smile and be inclusive. And you know what? Because that's what, when you hear the momentum and the drive of the music that you played and, that I love, there's love there.
Yeah.
It's not a competition. And so that's Bruce Forman. I'd love. Can we let's just stop pontificating, and you want to play a little bit? Play.
Sure.
It was an honor.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, man.
Thank you.
We burned through an hour just now.
Did we? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fun flies when you're playing time.
They'll only remember that Bruce got burned.
Bruce got burned, and he always
Bruce
gets
got burned. That's
It
the name of the
happens every
tune,
time.
man.
It happens every time.
Somewhere, Barney Kessel, Joe Pass, Tommy Tedesco, and Mondolo are all smiling. Bruce Forman, thank you for being part of the program, man.
Hey, thanks, Jake. Thanks for making the trip down here. It was a lot of fun.
It was worth it, man. It's the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you later.